The antlion. There's a killing field hiding in the dry dirt under your porch, and you've almost certainly walked past hundreds of these traps without knowing. The thing that built them can barely see and is smaller than your fingernail. It's the larva of the antlion, sometimes called a doodlebug, and it digs backward in a tightening spiral, flicking sand off its head in violent little jerks until it's carved a perfect funnel-shaped pit. Then it buries itself at the bottom with only its sickle jaws exposed. Here's the part that makes it brilliant. It builds the walls at the exact steepest angle sand can hold before collapsing, so the slope is always 1 grain away from failure. A single ant takes 1 step over the edge and the whole wall avalanches. If the ant scrambles, the larva flicks more sand up the slope to keep the landslide running, dragging it down into its jaws. It builds backward because it literally can't walk forward, the engineering equivalent of assembling furniture while facing the wall. And most people picturing an antlion picture the delicate winged adult. Turns out that stage barely eats. The terrifying one is the larva, and it can stay a larva for 3 years. It spends years as a trap and weeks with wings. Most of its life, it isn't an animal. It's architecture. For these creatures, the work happens before the hunt. The net-casting spider. Most spiders wait for you to blunder into their web. This one comes to you, holding a weapon it built specifically to throw. It's the ogre-faced spider, and instead of stringing up a web and hoping, it spins a small rectangular net of woolly silk and holds it stretched between its 4 front legs while hanging head down over a walkway. When an insect passes underneath, the spider lunges and slams the net down, and the silk expands to 2 or 3 times its size on impact, tangling the prey in microscopic fibers that grip by sheer friction instead of glue. And it does all of this in near total darkness, using 2 enormous forward-facing eyes that gather light like a camera lens wider than the spider's own head, soaking up roughly 2,000 times more light than a daytime jumping spider's. That's how it aims a thrown net on a moonless night. It's the only spider that shows up to work already holding the net, like a fisherman who rigs his tackle before he gets to the water. But here's where it gets wild. Those eyes are so light-hungry that daylight would burn them out. So every single dusk, the spider grows a fresh layer of light-sensitive cells, and every dawn, they break back down. It rebuilds its own vision nightly, just to keep hunting in the dark. The trapdoor spider. That patch of soil at your feet could open. Some trapdoor spiders sit under the same hidden door for over 20 years, so a hole you stepped over as a kid might still be occupied by the same tenant, and you'd never spot it, because the door is camouflaged so precisely you could stare right at it and never find the seam. The spider digs a silk-lined burrow, builds a beveled lid of soil and silk with a flexible hinge, then lays out radiating silk trip lines around the entrance like spokes on a wheel. It doesn't watch for prey, it feels for it. When something plucks one of those lines, the spider reads the vibration, and if it's the right footstep, the lid flips open and a strike happens in a fraction of a second. The same individual keeps that burrow for a year, then a decade, then, for some females, more than 20 years in one hole, longer than most pet dogs live. It builds a custom-fitted hatch with a working hinge, essentially a tiny storm cellar door, whose only purpose is to open and eat you. So just to recap, the ground has a door, the door has a tenant, and the tenant's been home since before you were born. If you're enjoying creatures like this, I post new animal deep dives all the time, and subscribing really helps. Thanks. The Bolas Spider. There's a spider that doesn't build a web at all. It fishes, and it cheats, using the lie aimed straight at a moth's deepest instinct. It's the Bolas Spider, and it catches almost exclusively male moths, which isn't bad luck. It's a strategy. The spider spins a single silk thread tipped with a heavy ball of glue, the bolus it's named for. Then comes the unsettling part. It releases airborne chemicals that mimic the exact scent a female moth gives off looking for a mate. Males downwind catch that perfume and fly toward what they think is a date. When one gets close, the spider swings the sticky ball, and the glue soaks into the moth's scales and locks it down. Some even fine-tune the blend through the night to match whichever moth species is flying. One thread, one droplet of glue, one swing that ends a moth who showed up expecting romance. This is the engineering happening long before the hunt, except here it's chemistry. The spider makes counterfeit perfume so the prey delivers itself. And it looks like it's clumsily flinging a web, but it isn't. The real trap isn't the glue ball. It's the fake pheromone that summoned the target in the first place. The moth isn't caught because it stumbled into a web. It's caught because it answered a love letter that was never real. The glowworm. Those starry cave ceilings people travel across the world to photograph, the ones that look like a private galaxy, they aren't stars. That's a hunting ground, and every light up there is a baited line. Each glowing dot is a glowworm, the larva of a fungus gnat, advertising a meal it has no intention of giving away. The larva builds a silk nest on the cave roof, then hangs dozens of silk threads down from it, each up to a foot or more long, every one studded with droplets of sticky mucus like beads on a fishing line. Then it glows a soft blue-green, and small flying insects in the pitch dark do what they always do: steer toward the brightest thing they can see. They fly into the lines, get stuck, and the larva hauls them up. A single one can hang up to 70 separate lines, some longer than your whole hand, all from a body smaller than a matchstick. The light is the bait, and the silk is the hook. It has essentially gone fishing, except the rods are made of its own spit, and the bait is its own glowing backside. Tourists call the scene magical. The insects would call it the last beautiful thing they ever saw. Beauty, when you build for a living, is just bait with better marketing. The caddisfly larva. In nearly every clean, fast-moving stream you've ever waded into, the rocks were wallpapered with tiny silk nets, and you walked right past them because they were working perfectly. They belong to the net-spinning caddisfly larva, which figured out a trick human engineers still use in fishing weirs, except it does it with thread spun from its own mouth. The larva builds a fixed silk retreat glued to a rock, then spins a fine mesh net that opens upstream, straight into the current. And then it just waits. The flowing water pushes drifting algae, detritus, and tiny prey into the mesh, and the larva eats whatever the river hands over. One larva can spin several meters of silk in a single day. Multiply that across a stream bed, and you're looking at millions of nets, filtering the entire river one mouthful at a time. The genius is that it outsources the hard part. Instead of burning energy chasing food, it lets the current do the work and takes a cut of everything that floats by. It basically invented passive income before we did. Scientists keep finding the nets tuned to the exact flow speed of each spot, which is absurd precision for a grub the size of a grain of rice. It doesn't hunt. It just strung a net across the river and started charging rent. The widow's web. That messy cobweb in the corner of your garage, the one that looks like the spider gave up halfway, it's the exact opposite of lazy. It's a loaded weapon, and the trap is aimed at the floor. This is the work of widow spiders, the black widow and its relatives, and those scraggly threads are under tension on purpose. The spider builds a dense tangle up high, then drops vertical gumfoot lines all the way to the ground. These are what do the killing. Each one is glued lightly at the bottom and held taut, like a bent sapling waiting to snap. The instant a beetle walking across the floor brushes that sticky base, the line rips free, and all that stored tension fires, yanking the prey straight up off the floor and into the web. The anchor is tuned just weak enough to let go at the exact force of an insect's step, so something many times the spider's weight gets flicked into the air like a sprung mousetrap. This is the trap engineered so well it fires itself. The spider preloads physics into stretch silk, then sits safely up top and lets the spring do the violence. That sloppy-looking web is really a row of cocked mousetraps. It just doesn't believe in tidy engineering. So that thing in the garage corner isn't abandoned. It's a bank of triggers, each waiting for a single footstep to spend. The anglerfish. A mile beneath the surface, where sunlight has never reached, the only light is bait. Any glow down there was made by something that wants to eat whatever swims toward it. The most famous resident is the deep-sea anglerfish, and it hunts with a fishing rod growing out of its own head, a spine reshaped into a flexible pole tipped with a glowing lure that dangles inches in front of an enormous expandable mouth. But the fish isn't even making that light. The glow comes from bacteria living inside the lure, which the anglerfish basically farms, renting living organisms to shine for it because it can't shine on its own. The lure hangs in a place where a meal might come once a month, so when prey shows up, that rod has to work the first time. And that famous nightmare face you're picturing, all teeth and fury, that's only the female. The male is tiny, and his entire life plan is to find a giant female, bite onto her body, and slowly dissolve until he's little more than a permanent attachment, a relationship strategy nobody asked for. So this animal can't make its own light, can't find food without it, and can't even keep its mate as a separate organism. The one thing it builds well is the lie that glows. Down here, the only thing worth growing is a better lie. The frogfish. This one looks exactly like a lumpy sponge, or a rock with a bad attitude, and that's entirely the point. You'd swim right past it, and so does its lunch, right up until the rock opens. It's the frogfish, and like its deep-sea cousins, it carries a fishing pole on its face, a modified spine tipped with a lure shaped like a tiny worm. It wiggles that lure to draw prey close, then strikes. And the strike is the part your eyes physically can't keep up with. A human blink takes about a third of a second. The frogfish's strike takes about 6 milliseconds, roughly 50 times faster than you can blink, one of the fastest feeding strikes ever measured. The lure does the luring, and then pure physics does the killing. When the frogfish snaps its mouth open, it turns its whole throat into a vacuum, and water rushes in so fast it carries the prey along before it can react. It can swallow things nearly as big as itself. Honestly, look at the thing. It's a fish that walks on hand-like fins, wears a fake worm on its forehead, and appears to have lost a fight with a sponge. The lure says come closer. By the time the prey realizes the rock has a mouth, it's already inside it. 6 milliseconds too late. The alligator snapping turtle. In the muddy rivers of the American South sits something that looks like a mossy, sunken boulder, and fish swim up to it on purpose because it's offering them a free snack. The thing is, there's a little pink worm wriggling at the bottom of that boulder, and it isn't a worm, and it isn't separate from the trap. It's the alligator snapping turtle, and that worm is part of its own tongue. The turtle settles onto the riverbed, opens its jaws wide, and holds perfectly still, while a fleshy pink appendage on the floor of its mouth twitches exactly like a live worm. A fish swims in to grab the easy meal, and the jaws slam shut. It's the only reptile known to use a lure built entirely inside its own mouth. That lure is a thumb-sized scrap of tissue, inside a head the size of your fist, on a turtle that can outweigh a large dog and crush bone in its beak. The stillness sells the disguise, the wriggle sells the worm, and the jaws close faster than any fish can reverse out. It grew a fishing lure inside its own mouth, which is at least convenient since it never has to remember where it left the bait. The fish genuinely did find a free meal. It just never read the fine print about who was serving it. The killer whale. Every other animal on this list builds its trap out of silk or sand or a piece of its own body. This last one builds its trap out of an entire shoreline and out of its own family's memory. Off the coast of Patagonia, a small number of orcas do something almost no other predator will even attempt. They deliberately run themselves aground onto the beach, charging the shallows at full speed and stranding their bodies on dry sand to snatch a sea lion pup, then wriggling and waiting for the next wave to drag them back out. The timing has to be exact. A 6-ton predator is throwing its entire body onto land, betting it can read the tide well enough to get back. And here's the part that stays with you. Not every orca does this. Only a handful know how, and they actively teach it to the younger whales, passing the technique down across generations like a family trade. It was learned by trial and error, then handed down on purpose, which is why so few whales in the ocean can do it. By the way, calling them killer whales is a flipped mistranslation of an old phrase, whale killer. They aren't a whale at all. Turns out they're the largest dolphin in the ocean, and this beaching trick isn't instinct, it's culture. The deadliest trap on this whole list isn't made of silk or sand. It's a single idea, perfected over decades and taught to the next generation. Every other animal here builds its trap. This one inherits it. If you made it all the way to the beaching orcas, you're exactly the kind of person I make these for. I post new animal deep dives like this every week, so hit subscribe and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.